Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. Today we'll be looking at the Tier 7 German cruiser, Mainz. For this review, I'll start with some history, we'll move into analysis, discuss your commander choices, run down the stats with you, and then we'll finally finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip any part of this though, please see the time codes down in the description. The 10,000 foot view of what the Mainz is intended to represent in World of Warships Legends is a version of the Hipper-class heavy cruiser with 150mm guns, or as the German designation would have been, 15 centimeters. By 1936, the world's major naval powers had signed onto the first London Naval Treaty, and it was at least looking like they might agree upon a second London Naval Treaty that would start negotiations in December 1935. While there might sparsely have been a reason for the Weimar to exist, something like the Mainz actually was considered, and for rationale that might sound very familiar to those of you who have watched my Suzuya review. The first London Naval Treaty, though Germany was not a party to it, had created a distinction between light cruisers, which are cruisers with a main battery of up to 155mm, and heavy cruisers, which was anything above that up to a maximum main battery caliber of 203mm. According to the Anglo-German Naval Treaty of 1935, Germany could build as many as 5 heavy cruisers, but they didn't want to provoke Great Britain, which pushed for and agreed to a moratorium on new heavy cruiser construction in 1936. So taking a page out of the Japanese book regarding the Mogami class, and not specifically about cheating on the math, even though that would happen too, but building what was essentially a light cruiser that could be upgraded into a heavy cruiser. To facilitate that, the Germans planned on reusing the same type of gun they had previously used on their Königsberg and Leipzig class of cruisers, with the Leipzig class being represented in-game by the Nuremberg. In order to allow the turrets to be replaced at a later time, that would require the design to have a new, larger turret that would fit the Hipper-class cruiser barbettes. The orders for the first 3 heavy cruisers, Hipper, Blücher, and Prinz Eugen, began in 1935, while light cruisers designated K and L were ordered the following year. In 1938, the Soviet Union, which had also not signed on to any naval treaties, as it was not a major power nor would it be for some time, began commissioning new heavy cruisers into service, and Germany exercised its option to complete light cruisers K and L as the heavy cruisers Seydlitz and Lützow. Functionally, that ends the story of the Mainz as a representation similar to one of these Hipper-class light cruisers, in quotation marks. Various events would conspire to see that neither the Seydlitz or Lützow were ever completed. First, while still on friendly terms, the USSR offered to purchase the all but completed Prinz Eugen, the 90 to 95% completed Seydlitz, and the Lützow, which was basically a hull at that point. Germany did not want to sell functionally 2 completed heavy cruisers to the Soviet Union, just in case war just might happen to break out between the two powers. But the Lützow had already fallen in priority and was not likely to be finished anytime soon. She was sold and transferred to the Soviet Union in April 1940. When, lo and behold, hostilities did happen to break out between the Soviet Union and Germany, Lützow, then renamed the Petropavlovsk, was still not completed. She would participate in the war and was sunk by elements of the Luftwaffe. Raised a year later and dubbed the Tallinn, the ship was nevertheless not completed. Spent some time after the war as a barrack ship and then was sold for scrap. After the sinking of the Bismarck in May 1941, Germany started to rethink its naval ambitions and made another one of its highly questionable development decisions. Now, it might have been true that another heavy cruiser, one that was 95% complete, would probably not change the war for the Atlantic. That's true. They decided that what would make a difference is a converted aircraft carrier. If that were the case, it would have made a lot more sense to just finish the Graf Zeppelin, which had been launched 2.5 years prior, and was perhaps a questionably designed ship, but was at least a purpose-built aircraft carrier with over twice the air wing capacity. In any case, Seydlitz was hauled into dock to have her superstructure removed, and began conversion to an aircraft carrier. She was renamed the Weser, which we have in-game as the Tier 5 German carrier. The plan for that ship was to carry about 10 Bf-109s, and 10 Ju-87 dive bombers, 22 planes less than Graf Zeppelin. In any case, she was obviously not finished as a light cruiser, a heavy cruiser, or an aircraft carrier either. While that is the design basis for the ship in the game, the model does have a few peculiarities, the most glaringly obvious being that it has the Nürnberg's turrets, sitting atop noticeably smaller barbettes. Had this ship been built, she would have been built with purpose-built turrets, and indeed construction of those turrets continued at a fairly leisurely pace until 1941, when I assumed someone looked around and figured they had absolutely nothing to mount them to. Though armor values in World of Warships exist mostly as a game mechanic, the armor layout of Seydlitz and Lützow would have been identical to other ships in the class, and that presumably would also go for torpedo protection. Though the game lists the year of the design as 1936, the presence of what appears to be Würzburg radar on its secondary targeting directors and the presence of AA guns that didn't exist in 1936, like the 3.7 centimeter Flak 42, which was not so coincidentally designed in 1942, speaks to this model being something of a mishmash of old turrets and late war technology. I'm also not sure where she picked up the quad torpedo launchers, but this is a game after all. And of course, last but not least, Mainz is named for the capital of the Rhineland-Palatinate, with the wheel thingy being the Mainz wheel, or Mainzerrad, which is present on the city's coat of arms and flag. As for the Mainz in-game, I had a strange feeling when sitting down with this ship for the first time that it would be a lot like another ship that I just reviewed, except this time Chili wouldn't need to ask me to fail division his Weimar just so he could shoot at legendary ships. There are a lot of similarities between Mainz and Weimar, but there are enough key differences that help make the Mainz feel like more than just a Tier 7 version of that Tier 6 ship. For one, the Mainz actually does have fairly functional amounts of armor when at close range. Gifted with a decent icebreaker, she can bow into a lot of targets and mitigate plenty of damage if shells come in low or aimed at the waterline. Broadside, you can game mechanic shells fired by larger ships by bouncing off of your impressively well-armored turtleback, and sometimes walk away with just a bloody nose when, under any other normal circumstance, you ought to be dead. This advantage does not translate to longer range combat though, since 25mm of armor everywhere else on the ship will allow 15-inch battleship shells and larger to punch straight through the upper belt and parts of your deck. At that point, your superior citadel protection may actually arm shells hitting you rather than just letting them pass harmlessly through the ship. It's not always easy being a relatively slow cruiser with a slow rudder shift. You may find it difficult to dodge shells in Mainz absent certain equipment and commander choices, as well as judicious timing. This tends to mean that people who will play the Mainz the best are folks who won't take themselves out of the match by sailing too far away from the action, but who are not suicidally aggressive. Key to being effective in this ship is knowing where you can go to exploit islands, how you will be attacked there, and when to safely transition from long to short ranges. But if you do keep yourself in the game, the Mainz has a huge amount of firepower with good sustained HE damage and fire chance at longer ranges, and some of the most brutal AP potential, and 16 fast short-range torpedoes when up close. All in all, the Mainz is a very strong ship, gifted with all sorts of firepower, packaged in something that looks a bit more and feels a bit more like a German cruiser. For commanders, I honestly wondered to what degree I could get away with just saying the same things I said about Weimar, but I will mention that you will probably want to do at least one thing to work on your ability to turn this ship. This is useful at both close and long-range combat for somewhat different reasons. The first thought most people will have when considering a commander is the gentleman of war himself, Karl von Müller. He offers a ton of offensive options, including multiple selections to improve your fire chance, AP damage, and even increase your rate of fire. In fact, von Müller can improve the Mainz to be the second best fire starter among Tier 7 cruisers, just barely ahead of Suzuya. All of this offensive possibility is going to be pretty hard to pass up to improve things that the Mainz really can benefit from, namely some speed, which thankfully von Müller's base trait will help out with, but also maneuverability. Unfortunately, if you want to do anything about your fairly average turret rotation, With von Mueller, the only way you can do that is through inspirations or equipment, so he will probably be more popular with cruiser captains that want to keep their distance and stick to HE. If you do want to take Mainz in close from time to time, then I would recommend this friendly-looking individual, Gunther Lutyens, who has the single best option for that in the form of Ingenious, which may also give you useful information on how many people are aiming in the direction of your relatively fragile German cruiser. He offers multiple options to improve your speed and rudder shift, or exploit your excellent sonar. He is maybe somewhat less attractive as an option to a lot of folks since you are likely to be relying only on his base trait to improve your damage, and he will be popular among folks who consider German cruisers as natural brawlers, and for folks who also may look at excessively long range on their cruiser as a somewhat dubious advantage. If that doesn't fit your fancy, there is always Reinhard Scheer, the base commander. Though you're unlikely to make the Mainz very stealthy, his chief advantage is probably the ability to lower your sea detectability the most of any of these three commanders. And that will give you some advantage should you want to transition from long-range fiery harasser to close-quarter AP and torpedo nightmare. Like all base commanders, he offers the widest variety of things that can improve your ship, but all very much the sort of no-frills store brand experience. And on Mainz, he's mostly going to be disappointed when it comes to his base trait, which is not exceptionally useful, and your third slot option, which I don't see offering many choices. As we jump into stats, please remember that all of the things that you're going to see on screen are pretty much stock values for Mainz, with the exception of concealment, which does include the camo that comes with the ship. Since this is our third proper German cruiser at this tier, expect plenty of comparisons to Hipper and Prinz Eugen. I think you should be familiar with those ships if you want to consider getting Mainz, but I will try to give you a feel for where the Mainz fits within the big picture of the game. Jumping first into survivability, the Mainz has a decent enough amount of hit points, just above average at 42,500, but lower than both Hipper and Prinz Eugen. The 16 to 150 millimeters of armor is less than what you'd see listed for either of her sister ships, and as we look at the armor model, you'll quickly notice that just about every surface, at least on the outside of the ship, is just a bit less armored than on the other Hippers. Importantly, though thinner than Hipper, you do have a usable belt and well-armored icebreaker. You are going to eat a lot more damage if you get hit higher on the ship though, with just 25 millimeters to protect the upper belt and deck. This means that you won't be bouncing shells from 15-inch battleships, and you're going to be more susceptible to HE damage from cruiser guns. Inside the ship, you do have one important piece of armor that is actually thicker, and that is this 40mm turtleback. This is the same as on Prinz Eugen, and 10mm thicker than the Tech Tree Hipper. Generally speaking, this means that you do play quite a bit like a Hipper class up close, but it trades damage quite a bit worse than either of her half-sisters. At a distance, the Mainz is also less tanky, as she tends to take a lot of damage from just about every battleship she'll face from most angles. And last but not least, you do have 22% torpedo reduction. This to me seems like a bit of a mistake, as she is tied for best torpedo reduction with Siegfried and Azuma, ships that were designated as a battleship and battle cruiser by their respective designers. But to the extent that you can enjoy being hit by a torpedo, this is about twice the damage reduction of your average Tier 7 cruiser. As for the guns on this ship, you've got a 4x3 arrangement of 150mm artillery. There are some important similarities with these guns and the guns on Weimar or München. And though those are both Tier 6 ships, it's probably what most folks are going to compare these to. The way that these guns differ is that you have an extra 600 meters of range, and you can shoot out to a competitive 15.8 kilometers. The already impressive German AP damage is 150 damage higher on this ship, and for better or worse, the reload time here is a second longer than on Weimar. This probably is not going to be noticeable, since I imagine most people will run a 4th slot reload modification, and frankly, that's what I do. Because this fairly average 23.7 second turret rotation isn't catastrophic even with that selected, but you would be right to think that the aim does feel a bit sluggish for a Hipper class cruiser, so if you want to brawl, you may want to do something about that. One difference that is important that is not listed on the screen is that the shell velocity for these is about 15% faster, which translates out to more than 0.8 of a second less travel time at 10 kilometers. So hitting things with your improved range is actually easier on mines, though this does come with the downside. The mines will have fewer islands that she can hide behind, so she will more often have to rely upon open water gunnery, angling, and maneuvering while firing. What is similar to Weimar and München is that this ship is an excellent fire starter. Though the fire chance is listed at only 8%, the high rate of fire is going to have her coming in just behind the usual offenders, Cleveland, Kutuzov, Chapayev, and Suzuya. Her HE DPM lags behind all of those ships on paper, but since you have 1/4 penetration rather than 1/6 penetration, the mines often outdamages those ships in practice. In spite of both of those facts though, the mine's AP potential is even better, and she will very easily out DPM every other tier 7 cruiser in the game right now, so using that against other cruisers and battleships at medium or close range is preferred if the angles allow for it. The Mainz is equipped with the same sort of mid to low range, fast, and low damage torpedoes that nearly every other German cruiser has, and several battleships too. The curious thing is that you do come with 33% more of them. Rather than the Hipper's arrangements of 4x3, you have 4x4. This will be occasionally helpful against the relatively few battleships out there that can eat 6 of these things and keep going, or in situations where you need to defend yourself from a larger number of foes. The only other major difference here is that you have a 90-second reload, which is 22 seconds longer than on Hipper or Prinz Eugen. In the anti-aircraft department, the German cruisers are pretty decent, kind of right in the middle, and the Mainz manages to be right there in the middle with Hipper and Prinz Eugen, just a little bit better. This comes in the form of a slightly increased damage per second for both mid-range and close-range AA, and the short story is that you are basically a C+ student here. The Mainz is tied with her 2 half-sisters for being the slowest cruiser at tier 7. Though 720 meters is pretty good cornering for a cruiser, about 30 meters tighter than average, and tighter than the other German cruisers here, 10.5 seconds is a pretty slow rudder, which may, and probably should, influence your equipment choices, particularly if you want to be able to take this ship in close, or dodge anything at longer ranges. The base sea detectability on Mainz is about 700 meters worse, or longer, than average. This is the same sea detectability for the Siegfried, which is pretty much the worst of any cruiser that isn't Russian. Your high detectability is also true from air, and owing to your small guns, 7 kilometers is actually not that bad while firing from smoke, though it is still a bit on the long side for a light cruiser. For consumables, naturally you have a cruiser damage control. There's nothing surprising there. Next, you have the same sort of powerful German sonar that comes with other Hipper-class German cruisers. This offers you an extremely powerful ability to detect incoming torpedoes and other ships at pretty decent ranges. You do have an option to swap this out for defensive fire AA. This would probably be a mistake unless matchmaking goes completely sideways, or you're doing it for a very specific reason, even if this ship does have pretty decent AA. Next, you have the same mysterious BF-109 float plane catapult fighter, which will give you the same sort of extra spotting potential and defense from those pesky carriers. And finally, you have the normal cruiser heel. This may look a little weaker than on Hipper or Eugen, but that is just because both of those ships have more health than you do. So, as we get into our gameplay, we are going to be on shards. We're going to get the middle spawn. Ordinarily one of my favorites in a German ship. This is maybe not the German ship to be in the middle with, but before we get too much into that, we will go ahead and put our commander up on the screen. This is going to be a little bit of a case of do as I say and not as I do, because this is not how I would prefer to run this ship, mostly because I would want a third heal, even though refill station is occasionally useful. I guess it's always useful if your guns are firing, but this thing feels like a ton of bricks trying to maneuver with the full 10.5 second rudder, and also with nothing to help my turret rotation. As much as this feels a little bit like a Hipper under the best of circumstances, Karl von Mueller here is not doing me a whole lot of favors. Now, as we're hanging out kind of behind these islands, I will take the moment to point out, even though you can never unsee the fact that these turrets are too small for this ship, I actually do kind of really like this model because, of course, though the Mainz was never a real ship, she is actually wearing one of Prince Eugein's historic camos, that being from, I believe, May of 1942. So if you think this camo looks pretty good on this ship, it's because it's a real thing. Now, usually you don't have to wait quite so long for something to happen in the game because, of course, somebody usually gets spotted immediately at B. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, so we're going to go ahead and start scooting around. Almost as soon as we have this thought in our head, we do see that some folks have appeared on the horizon. Apparently, we have finally moved the spawns back far enough to give people at least a fighting chance of turning around or backing up without being immediately spotted. I would prefer the turning around to backing up, personally. But as you can see, this is actually not a position where it's super easy to shoot with either the Mainz or the Weimar. We can use a little bit of this corner. We do not want to get shot by a Georgia. It will do a lot of damage to us if it hits us. At this range, and particularly broadside, I imagine it would quite easily do terrible things, and maybe even end my game pretty quick. Now, it looks like we have applied the gas a little too much, and we actually kind of pop out in front of this Georgia. Not great. He is firing at us. It looks like he is not playing the fact that I'm backing up, or at least not playing the fact I'm backing up with the ever so fair engine mod. And then we accelerate, and it's time to start to get out of here, because that's too much stuff that might want to shoot at me. Now we can see Georgia is sailing off and paying attention to something completely different. I don't feel quite so bad shooting at an Atago. We have maybe not taken account of all of the ships that are right there. If I were going to make a black hole in the middle of a map, it would not be on shards, because that seems like a really good place to have your entire team shot at. We, of course, have another Mainz, which is shooting out at us with HE. At that range, even HE is probably not a bad idea. Considering how lightly armored this is, you probably could still do a decent amount of damage with AP. But you do risk some shatters. The Mainz has kind of a high belt armor, higher than either the Hipper or Prince Eugen, at least on the armor model, which is a little bit peculiar. And the reason why I've kind of stopped here is because I'm pretty sure the island behind me is blocking most of the shots that would normally be taken at me, and it looks like the Bismarck and the Scharnhorst are dealing with their own problems up there, so probably won't shoot at me. It looks like we are perfectly situated now, having blocked all the line of sight to us, so we go dark. And with that, we are going to go ahead and push in here. It looks like that Bismarck got caught up on the rocks, so we should be able to close the distance. If we get inside 8 kilometers, he probably won't be lobbing shells over my icebreaker and into my citadel. He still can do a lot of damage if he aims high on my ship. But for a moment, we are a little bit distracted by this Iowa that's coming in. We do open up on him, even though he can see us, knowing that we're going to tuck in behind this island pretty shortly thereafter. As much faster as these shells are versus the Weimar, you can see you can still pretty easily lob a good number of islands, at least as long as you're far enough back. That said, I could probably be a lot closer to these islands if I were in a Weimar or something like an American cruiser. They're not super high arcs, they're not super low like Russians. They're just right. We switch over to the Scharnhorst because, of course, the Scharnhorst can see us, and that's not going to make us happy if the Scharnhorst can see us, and that gets us the attention of the Iowa. Iowa is a scary ship. We continue to shoot because, of course, we continue to be spotted by plane. We are a little bit thankful that Iowa is shooting HE. He didn't really get a good hit on us, but he did get some hits on us. That probably would have gotten 4,000 or 6,000 damage if he had been using AP off of the rear. We are super close. We are going to use our AP. We're targeting the front extremity, the bow of the ship there, because we can land decent damage. And at this range, we have managed to close the gap enough that it's easy to use offensively our torpedoes. This is one of the great things about Hipper-class ships. They are really the most dangerous ships in the game, inside of like 6 kilometers. One thing I will say here is turning this thing is a struggle, and this would feel a lot more like a brawler if I had done something about my turret traverse and my rudder shift. Now we open up on the Piotr Bagration. Unfortunately, he does not last long enough to show off just how much damage you can do with the AP. We saw a little bit of a preview there with just 6,500 damage without any citadels. You can chunk people pretty badly with this ship without even really trying that hard or landing any critical hits. So, and the nice thing is you do that in this case, I'm shooting every 5.5, not even 5.5, I think it's 5.1 seconds. So that's pretty good. It looks like he left us some parting gifts, but we are going to outrun them. Now, normally I would not tell you that running down in Iowa is a good idea, but it does seem as though we are destined to win. But for the purposes of a review, showing the sort of bad things that can happen to you in this ship, if I take a huge chunk in this while running it down, that would show off the ship. For better or worse, he's still shooting HE, so unfortunately it doesn't look like he's going to give me the opportunity to really show that off. He's still at such an angle that I'm shooting HE back at him. He's actually getting to the point where I would start to shoot AP ordinarily. And wide spreads for no particular reason other than that they are pretty. We launch 8 torpedoes into the side of that low health Iowa and finish him off. So pretty straightforward game there. This is a little bit more of a damagey game than I usually like to show off, but we got to see a little bit of what the Mainz is good at. What you can do if you successfully play her at range and then also carefully close in to fight the enemy up close, where you are super dangerous. Closing thoughts on the ship. Overall, I would say I enjoy this ship quite a bit. It's not quite as absurd or as passive as the Weimar, which not only has a faster reload, but has the conspicuous advantage of being down a tier. Folks who expect the same thing out of the Mainz as Weimar will kind of find that she's not quite as easy to master, as her lower arcs offer fewer opportunities for island camping. And what you have to be is a bit more mindful of aiming, since there are a lot more surfaces where the HE does not automatically penetrate, even if there still aren't all that many of them. Though I'm not quite convinced the ship is completely fair, it does feel less exploitive to play, and frankly, it's just more fun because it will force you to move around more, and it does feel a lot more like a high-tier German cruiser. That's an experience some of us love quite a bit, and I do enjoy being able to take this thing in and brawl from time to time, while also being effective at range. So it is kind of the whole package. It might be too much of the whole package, but it is a ship in the game, and it is fun to play. So those are my thoughts on the Mainz. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.